Yada. Well, we've been working our way through the Exodus saga, trying to see this story through fresh eyes, a different lens, new perspectives. We've been reading and studying these stories, and we're looking for the helpful, practical lessons, the personal meanings. What do these stories mean to me? Instead of literal facts, we're looking for symbolic meanings and metaphysical interpretations. Our series title is From Slavery to Freedom, and From Freedom to Fulfillment, because we know that the Exodus is about the transitions, the changes in consciousness that we move through as we mature spiritually. Now we all experience change and transition. We move, we change. We transition from grade school to middle school to high school. New relationships begin, old ones end or change. We transition from being dependent on our parents to independence and sometimes having them depend on us. Society changes. The world today bears very little resemblance to the world I grew up in. The world keeps changing. In fact, the only constant in our lives is change. We can try to ignore it, but change is everywhere we look. But if we are open, if we see clearly, and if we respond wisely, we can choose to see this change and transition in our lives as a vehicle for growth, an opportunity for spiritual rebirth and transformation. The Exodus is about our transition from the slavery of sense consciousness to the freedom of awareness, the freedom of choice, the freedom of self-discipline, and we are learning to apply the law of mind action in all of our affairs. We are learning to rely on God's presence within for all of our needs, spiritual and material. 2 weeks ago, we discussed crossing the Red Sea and learning to establish a consciousness of freedom by relying on God's presence. We learned that God would even fight on our behalf against Pharaoh, our unenlightened will, our ego, against stubbornness and negative self-talk, which keeps us in a bondage, a slavery of our own making. Our Red Sea experience symbolizes leaving one state of being for another. The Red Sea is that big obstacle that seems to stand in our way. Our own useless and unnecessary suffering. So now we are free. Now what? After our big demonstration, it's time to party. Isn't that what happens? You pass that big test, you reach that milestone, you feel like throwing a party, you feel like celebrating. The first part of Exodus chapter 15 is a big celebration where Moses sings a victory song. And Moses' sister, Miriam, who is called a prophetess, by the way, she also sings about the great victory that they've had. Sing to God has thrown into the sea. Scholars think that the Song of Miriam in Exodus 15:20 is one of the oldest verses in the Bible. That story might, that little piece of verse might be as old as the Exodus itself. So everyone is having a big party, having fun. But now they have to get down to business. The people are free, but now what? They're out in the desert. So what's the first thing they're going to need? Anybody?
Water.
They're going to need water. Moses leads the people 3 days out into the wilderness, but they can't find any water. Water is quite literally life. W.H. Alden said that thousands have lived without love, but not one without water. They finally find water in a place called Marah, but they can't drink this water because it's bitter. It's contaminated in some way. The word Marah means bitter. So, what do the people do? They complain. They murmur. Let me hear you murmur. Murmur, 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 murmur. Okay. Then God directs Moses to throw a tree or a piece of wood, depending on which version of the Bible you read. God tells Moses to throw a tree or a piece of wood into the water, which makes the water sweet so the people can drink it. What happened? A miracle? Remember, Moses had been a shepherd in that wilderness for 40 years. He had to keep his flocks watered. Do you think he might have known about natural remedies or the healing properties of plants and herbs? Moses may have known a few tricks to survival in the wilderness. After air and water, what's the most basic need there is? Food. There's even a rule of thumb, the rule of threes. A person can go 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. We are learning to rely on God's presence within for everything, for all of our needs. In chapter 16, there's a story about God providing food for the people. God provides manna. Manna in the morning and quail in the evening. Manna in the morning, quail in the evening. The people are hungry, and once again they begin to complain. They murmur. Let's hear it. Murmur, 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 murmur. Exodus 16:2. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses. The Israelites said, "If only we had stayed in Egypt, where we sat by pots of meat and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill us with hunger." Sure, we had our problems in Egypt, including slavery, but Egypt also had the predictable comforts of settled life, including food. Our sense consciousness can convince us to choose the comfortable known rather than risk an uncomfortable unknown. In the wilderness, while we are in transition, we learn that sometimes freedom isn't all it's cracked up to be. It isn't always a bed of roses, folks. The wilderness is that state of being where we have left the old thing, but we have not yet developed the consciousness to move on to the new thing. Our wilderness experience trains us into our freedom, but until we have developed that consciousness, we are still susceptible. We may long, we may desire the comfortable known. We forget what bondage was really like. And we may want to go back to the bottle or the abusive relationship or whatever particular slavery we were involved in. Until we are secure in our freedom, the comfortable known may tempt us back to our bondage in Egypt. And we must learn to rely on God to be secure in our freedom. Then the Lord said to Moses, this is 16:4, the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. Moses told the people to trust God and that there would be bread from heaven every morning and meat at twilight every night. And in the evening quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew all around. And when the layer of dew lifted, there was a flaky substance as fine as frost on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, What is it? The Israelites called it manna. And manna means, what is it? It was like white coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Now, manna is a real thing. You could have some today if you knew where to find it. Manna is a doughy, sticky, sweet substance that insects make by boring into tamarisk trees, and the sap drips down. Sap falls from the trees, and you can eat it almost like candy. And as we've said about other things, the biblical writers were probably aware of this naturally occurring substance and wrote it into the biblical narrative. Now, as we said, there's 3 million people wandering around in the desert. I kind of doubt that there would be enough manna for 3 million people. But, Moses tells the people to collect as much manna as they needed for the day, but not to save any. Don't hold over some for the next day. But of course, some of them get greedy and they don't listen. They gathered more than they needed and they left some until morning, but overnight it would become wormy and rotten. Chapter 22 says that on the 6th day, they could gather twice as much food because there wouldn't be any on the 7th day because, it's the Sabbath. God's taking a rest. We're supposed to rest. So how can we only have manna for one day when we have to collect enough for 2? We don't, and by the way, we haven't received the instructions for the Sabbath yet. We don't get instructions for the Sabbath until Moses receives the 4th commandment on Mount Sinai. We haven't gotten to that part of the story yet. So why are we preparing for the Sabbath? But of course, the writers knew about the Sabbath, and they had to account for that in the story. Manna is a symbol of divine provision, of faith and spiritual substance. Our journey through the wilderness represents a training ground in which we train our consciousness into freedom by learning to rely on God for all of our needs. The wilderness is the human condition, the spiritual struggle, and our search for higher meaning. We may be free from our familiar and comfortable bondage of error thinking. We may be legally free, but we must develop a consciousness of freedom. And now we face a different kind of trial. The challenge of trusting God for all of our spiritual and material needs. We must learn to trust God's presence within for our daily needs. We cannot store up spiritual substance. We need a daily supply. Give us this day our daily bread. Our spiritual nourishment needs to be a constant in our life. Now, it's marvelous to attend church on Sunday or maybe go on a spiritual retreat once a year. Don't you feel good, But we need a daily practice of prayer and meditation. We need a commitment to spiritual practice. Manna is a reminder that we must continually nurture and renew our faith. Manna teaches us about divine provision, faith, and the importance of daily spiritual nourishment. And because of the Sabbath, rest. Through God's presence within, the sometimes bitter water of life is made sweet. Manna from heaven is a reminder that God sustains us every day. And as we declare our freedom, we learn to trust in God's supply so that we no longer desire the comfortable known of bondage. God bless you all. Well, this is our opportunity, yours and mine, to pour out the gift of God from within us through our tithes and our love offerings. And can we share this offertory blessing together? Divine love flowing through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I am joy-filled and grateful. Thank you, God. And you can send your gifts, your tithes, your love offerings to paypal.me/UnityLincoln. That's paypal.me/UnityLincoln. You can also send your gifts through the mail, through a bank transfer, by sending it to Unity Lincoln, P.O. Box 30209, Lincoln, Nebraska 68503. Or you can go to our webpage where you'll find a convenient link to donate via PayPal. Or you can use this little code right here to scan on your phone and send us your gift that way. You can also help support Unity Lincoln by liking us on Facebook and subscribing on YouTube. And you can be God-given no matter how you try. And just as sure are living and the Christ is deep inside. The more you give, the more God gives to you. Just keep on giving, because it's really true that you can be share this affirmation for our church family. Together, Unity Lincoln is blessed to draw the people, funds, and all that is required for the health and growth of our community and peace in the world, heart to heart. And